This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello, my name's John Bleasdale and I am a writer and film critic, and today I am going to be talking to Gwynne Jones, crime novelist of a series of books set in Venice, featuring, I should say, the honorary consul Nathan Sutherland. They're all super books and well recommended, but the reason I'm talking to him is that he's also a passionate lover of vintage horror cinema, from British Hammer all the way through to Italian gialli. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be doing something slightly different as well. At the end of the episode, I've also added some of my sort of roving reporting, if you'd like. I had an opportunity to go to the film festival in Tromsø in Norway, and while I was there, I asked a couple of people for their recommended film books, and I recorded their responses, so I'll introduce each one, and you'll be able to enjoy those at the end of the episode. One final thing, I made a slight mistake during the conversation, and I just wanted to point it out to you because I think it's funny, and I don't want you to miss it. I was referring to Alien, and I wanted to say Tom Skerritt, but I've got something like, there's such a thing as face blindness. I think I've got name blindness. I really struggle remembering and pronouncing names correctly, and I often get them mixed up. So that's all to say, I did, or I'm stupid. That's the other possible solution. So I didn't say Tom Skerritt, I said Tom Selleck, which there's a missed opportunity there, I think. Anyway, if you enjoyed the episode, please remember to like and to share as far and wide as possible. You can follow me on Twitter at @DrJonty, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation.
Well, initially, not Venice per se, but back in the 1990s, I worked for a few months for the European Space Agency in Frascati, which kind of sounds like the coolest job ever. And, I'm thinking about, I-beams glittering off the Tannhauser Gate and things like that. But it wasn't. It was. I was compiling a list of universities and universities who subscribed to various publications that the space agency put out, and it was nothing more than that. That's when I first came to Italy, was via IT. we came to Venice because we both lost our jobs during the economic crisis. Yeah, my wife and I, we were both working for the same bank, one of those banks that was sliding out of business. And we both lost our jobs around about the same time. And I met a man in a pub who told me about this thing you could do, teaching English as a foreign language. And I thought, well, you can do things like that? He says, yes, you don't make much money, but it's a living, isn't it? And so I went back and said to Caroline, a man in a pub has told me about a thing called teaching English as a foreign language. And I thought she was going to say, oh, yeah, put more water in it next time or something. But she actually said, no, we could do this. We could do this, and we did, and that was 10 years ago now, and that's around about the time that I started writing, I suppose.
Right, so, and that's when you moved to Venice as well, like 10 years ago, right?
That's right, yes. Yeah, 10 years in March, incredibly, yeah.
Wow. How do you find teaching?
I really enjoy it. I mean, like many of us, I suppose I started off doing the private language school thing where you'd be teaching business English or adult classes or tiny children and things like that. Now I mainly work in the state school system, and kind of suits me better. It's a lot of fun usually. I mean, I'm teaching in an art school at the moment, and it's great because there are kids there who will talk about Hitchcock and Kubrick and things like that, which is tremendously entertaining.
I've taught for about, it's going to be coming on 20, 25 years maybe.
Right, yeah.
And I find it endlessly fascinating and, and inspiring. It's just like, if I ever...
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I'll just get by on adrenaline. It feels creative. You have to think on your feet. You have to improvise at times. And it's everything that computer programming it was not, basically. So.
Lots of human contact and lots
of...
Yes,
yeah.
And in Italy, it's a little bit like a cross between a social worker and a sort of, camp entertainer as well.
There is a lot of that, yeah. And I think, there's a certain curiosity value. Like, why is this middle-aged British guy coming and talking to us in English all the time? And so there's kind of a natural curiosity there, that this strange foreign bloke is in our class. What are we going to do? So that's quite fun as well, yeah.
And so you started on like your series of novels, which I've read. Which one have I read? I've read one, The Venetian Game, yeah.
Yeah, that was the first one. Yeah, that was the first one. It was my first book, and my wonderful agent managed to sell it, and that came out nearly 5 years ago now. And where the sixth book in the series comes out in July, which is The Angels of Venice. Got a contract for a further 2, so it's taken off in a way that I couldn't really have imagined, and possibly my publisher couldn't have imagined either.
What was the sort of inspiration for you writing those books?
Really, I mean, when I was teaching mainly adult students at the time, one of my students was the honorary consul for Thailand, and every lesson, I'd arrive with a lesson plan, and he'd say, no, Philip, we can't do that today. I've got a problem with somebody's lost their passport, or maybe they've been in trouble with the police. And I thought, wow, what a job this would be. If you were writing a thriller series, you wouldn't have to make, your protagonist a cop or a private detective. Somebody in a job like this, people would be coming to him with problems all the time, and that seemed like kind of interesting. Yeah. And the other inspiration was going on a visit to, I think it was the Banco Popolare in Campo San Luca, where they have an archive, various precious maps, books, artworks, etc. And I remember the archivist taking down this tiny little prayer book, which was supposedly illustrated by Bellini. And he told us about how he brought it back from Budapest in his jacket pocket next to his heart. And it just got me thinking about something so tiny, which could be so valuable, that could just be slipped into a pocket. So just the city itself, really, walking around it is just an inspiration.
I think one of the things I really enjoyed about reading the book was because I know Venice very well, I was a little bit cautious when I was reading it, in the sense that I've just come back from, okay, this is slightly tangential, but it does come back. I've just come back from Norway, and I had a great time there. And I was saying, I'm really pleased, because I was really worried that I'd been, Nordic noired to death at some point. Yeah. There'd be some sort of, and they were like, no, but there's no crime here. There's literally no crime here. And I was so relieved when I was reading your book that at one point you say, there's no crime in Venice. It's just not that. You didn't sort of invent this ultra criminal sort of world,
Exactly. You have to do it. I mean, Colin Dexter did it with Oxford, another city where there isn't really much violent crime. I mean, I've been in Venice for 10 years. I think there was one murder about 5 years ago, 2 guys had a fight or something like that. But, it's a remarkably safe city to walk around. But I do remember getting lost one night, walking home, and just walking down this narrow calle, and then realizing it just ended in a blank wall, and thinking, what would I do if I turned around and I saw that little red figure following me? And so It's an incredibly safe city, but there are times where you just think, gosh, what if I hear footsteps behind me or something like that?
Did you know much about the city before you came in terms of like your cinematic imagination? I mean, obviously Don't Look Now, you've just referred to there, is probably the best known of those portraits.
Yeah, probably Don't Look Now is the only one I'd seen. In recent years, I've discovered there's quite an interesting little subgenre of Italian horror set in Venice. There's a very good one called Chi l'ha vista morire, Who Saw Her Die, which is quite an effective little film. Solamente Nero, which came out a year after Profondo Rosso came out, hence the title. Another quite an atmospheric little film. And there's a wonderful, mad little film made back in the 60s called The Monster of Venice, also known as The Embalmer, where a man dressed as a monk has a subterranean base where he abducts his victims. And if you ever want to see a man in a scuba diving costume, dressed as a monk, chasing a man through St. Mark's Square, I mean, there really is no better film to start with. And
there's no other film to start with.
There possibly isn't, it possibly isn't. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why, maybe the makers of the film failed to understand that it shouldn't be difficult to run away from a man in a wetsuit. But
Who Saw Her Die, the first one that you mentioned, that's the George Lazenby film, right?
George Lazenby, who looks kind of unrecognizable in it.
He took it very seriously, didn't he? He's really kind of acting in it.
He's pretty good, actually. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he'd lost a lot of weight after Bond. He looks very gaunt, very 70s, but he's really good in it. Yeah, he gives a proper performance in it.
Maybe a little bit better than the film itself deserves, but
well, maybe so. Yes.
I'm always surprised that there aren't more films filmed in Venice, because it just seems like you get such a bang for your buck in terms of.
You do, yeah. I mean, I can only assume. Well, nowadays it would be expensive, I suppose. I mean, back in the 70s, the city was going through harder times, I suppose. Maybe it was cheaper to do in those days. There was that Kinski movie back in the 80s, Vampire in Venice, which, I mean, it's Klaus Kinski, Christopher Plummer, Donald Pleasance, and it is terrible. But it gives you good Venice, yeah.
I remember seeing that on Channel 4, like late at night, sometime in the 90s, and it's got some very dodgy young girls, naked young girls, really, really on the borderline.
Oh, I mean, Kinski was an absolute pig on set by the sound of it. Some of the stories about his behaviour, you think, well, don't you go to prison for that sort of thing? But yeah, it's...
according to at least, I think, one of his daughters, he was serially abusive.
Yeah. I mean... You understand why the Native Americans in Fitzcarraldo actually offered to kill him, I suspect.
Yeah, and why Werner Herzog was sorely tempted.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you as well, because you've got this real love of sort of vintage horror as well. Where's that? When did that start? How did that start?
Right. I think for people of my generation, it probably started with the BBC Two double bills that they used to be on Saturday nights. And you'd start with maybe one of the old Universal black and whites, and then there'd be maybe a Hammer or an Amicus colour film after that. So the rite of passage, if you like, was first being allowed to stay up to watch the black and white one, and then maybe being allowed to stay up to watch the colour one as well. And they were just magical, Around about the same time, there was the BBC adaptation of Dracula with Louis Jourdan, which was tremendous. I mean, I still think it's almost certainly the most accurate version of the book. And when I got a little bit older, on Saturday nights, there was the Hammer House of Horror TV series. And that was the only thing people talked about in school on Monday morning was, did you see Hammer House of Horror? Yeah. I mean, it seemed incredibly strong stuff at the time. I mean, it was post-Watershed entertainment, but again, you'd beg your parents to be allowed to go to stay up and watch that. Yeah.
I remember Hammer House of Horror and Tales of the Unexpected as well, sort of being two of those things that Monday morning, what we would say today is water cooler conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think horror is particularly good at that. There was one movie that I always remember being talked about again and again and again, to the point that when I actually saw it, I was waiting to be underwhelmed, and actually wasn't. It was Omen 2.
Oh, that, yeah.
Yeah, because there's a really elaborate death where a guy gets killed by being chopped in half by
the lift cable.
The lift cable, yes.
Yeah.
And I remember that being described to me. And there's something about horror that people describe something to you, and you think, how can they have done that? That's impossible.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the bit that gets me in Omen 2 is the guy under the ice, which is genuinely frightening, I think. I mean, and yeah, the elevator cable death. I mean, you think that was incredibly well done. I mean, I think in the first Omen, I mean, it's just a series of brilliant set pieces. Patrick Troughton being impaled by the spire from the church, David Warner's head. It's incredible. I think the story had that David Warner actually had his own head for a while.
Sorry, say again?
The decapitated head, which was not actually David Warner's actual head. Yes, apparently he actually had that at home for a while. Yeah.
Okay, I see. I thought you were saying I thought you were saying he actually got decapitated and he had to keep it on or something. I was so confused.
I could imagine. Phew, that was a close one. Yes,
that was COVID confusion right there. Omen seems to belong to that school of horror which nowadays exists in American movies like Final Destination, where it's really based on a very elaborate set of, how are we just going to kill these 5 or 6?
Exactly, yeah. You're waiting for the next big set piece, yeah. And they're good at that, I think, yeah.
In terms of the Italian horror, is that, we already talked about Profondo Rosso, and, well, not talked about, but mentioned. When did you start getting into those?
Yeah, that's a good question, because, I mean, back in the 80s, when I was starting to sort of, collect books about old films and old horror films, and you'd see references to people like Mario Bava and Barbara Steele. Who is Barbara Steele? She's been in all these Italian films. You never got to see any of them because they were never on British telly. I think maybe Bava's Black Sunday was on once, and I think I saw The Cat of Nine Tails, Argento's second film, on TV, but most of this stuff was just not turning up on British television until maybe the last 20 years. But then when streaming services and YouTube and that started hosting this stuff, I realized there was this absolutely amazing genre of Italian horror cinema, which, I mean, some of it is just stupendous, I think. And that's when I got very heavily into Mario Bava and Argento and, maybe a bit of Lucio Fulci, and the whole giallo subgenre is fascinating. But it took a long while to find this stuff because it wasn't easily available. And, I was living in Swansea and living in Tenby at the time. And, Mario Bava was not well thought of in Swansea at that time. So
we've got a future guest coming on the podcast to talk about his biography of Bava, which I think is due out in March. So that's something for us to look forward. It's a guy called Leon Hunt.
Right. I think I might have heard of this. Yes. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, he's already sent me it to read, but the publication date is a little ahead.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, well, it's one of the benefits, to tell you the truth, of doing podcasts. I'm getting lots and lots of people sending me stuff, which is great. Keep it coming, guys. What was your entry gate drug to Italian horror then? What was the sort of film that you've heard about it and you've read about it, and what was the one that you watched that went, whoa, this is on my wavelength?
Yeah, it was most certainly Mario Bava's Black Sunday.
Right.
Which is kind of atypical because we do associate Bava with these extraordinary colours and things like that. It's the only movie he made with Barbara Steele. People tend to think she made a whole series of films with him, but actually it's the only one with Bava. And I was just struck by how beautiful it looked. You could clip images from it and stick them on your wall, and they look absolutely gorgeous. And Steele looks amazing in it, with those cheekbones and those big eyes. And it's pretty gruesome in parts as well. I mean, you're not staking people through the heart. No, you're going to stake them through the eye, because that's even more gruesome, isn't it? And then after that, probably discovering Argento, probably with Cat of Nine Tails, which isn't his strongest film of that period, but then seeing Suspiria and just being blown away by the use of colour and the fact that, does the plot make sense? Well, it kind of does, but it took me quite a long time to work out what it was. But it was just something to get completely lost in. It was a movie you could get utterly, completely lost in, this mad, nightmarish fairy tale world. It's like, a bad dream of a film, and I mean that in a good way. I was watching it just the other day for its 45th anniversary, and it still has an impact on me, from the very opening in the airport and the opening tinkling chords of that score by Goblin, and it still has a great impact on me.
Dario Argento, for me, was one of those filmmakers, much more so than Bava, but he was one of those filmmakers who I kind of had to learn to like, if you know what I mean. I had to sort of work out what he was doing before I got into it. And I think it was very much related to that idea that you just said of the sort of dreamlike quality, that if you approach it on a sort of like, cold light of day logic, then you can be quite resistant to it, I think. Or at least I was. I mean, I'm talking about myself really here. But then when I watched Suspiria, so I watched Profondo Rosso. And actually, I was sort of sent it to review. Somebody said, review this for a internet site called Electric Sheep. And so I sat down to watch it, and I thought, well, it's kind of ugly and it's kind of nasty and it's sadistic, and I found it difficult to sort of find anything redeeming about it. And then I watched Suspiria, and then I went back and watched it and went, okay, now I get it. Now I'm not.
It took me a while to get into Profondo Rosso. I love it now. I mean, I think it's a romantic comedy with murders in. I genuinely think that relationship between David Hemmings and Daria Nicolodi, I think it's utterly charming. And I think I could imagine William Powell and Myrna Loy doing it sort of 30 years or 40 years previously, only with, fewer horrible axe murders and things like that.
Women getting boiled to death.
Oh yeah, that's horrible, isn't it? Yeah, that's the worst part, possibly. Yeah, Inferno as well as that same dream logic as Suspiria. Again, I've watched it and thought, I don't know if this makes sense, but just as a series of images, as pure cinema, it's extraordinary.
Bava, he sort of, he makes amazing horror movies, but he sort of also makes really good sort of science fiction film, and he makes a later film, which is a sort of giallo in the sense of a police film, really, more a sort of kidnapping. What's it called? Is it called Stray?
Cani Arrabbiati?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the English title is. Angry Dogs.
I don't know. Yeah, I suppose it would be, but
rabid dogs, maybe.
Yeah, so many of these are different titles, don't they? Yes, I mean, Bay of Blood, for example, which is basically Friday the 13th. It's known as Chain Reaction or the twitch of the death nerve and such like. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say Black Sunday, I think, is Black Sabbath and Mask of the Demon, isn't it? Or are those different films? Because I know.
Black Sunday is the Mask of the Demon,
right?
La Maschera del Demonio. Black Sabbath is Trilogy of Terror. I think in Italian, yeah.
Right. So of those sort of, so you've got Argento and you've got Bava and Fulci as well.
I like some of Fulci's films. I think, and I don't want to. I know Fulci has a legion of dedicated fans out there. I think he was a lesser talent than Bava and Argento. Sometimes I just think this is too much. This is crazy. This is nuts. And sometimes it works really well. There's the Beyond, I think, is it E tu vivrai nel terrore, or the Al di là in Italian. There's some wonderful images in it. It's utterly grotesque at times, but possibly in a good way. His zombie film, of course, is kind of iconic. But there's also an awful lot of horrible stuff in there, like the New York Ripper is just... It's a film I've seen half of, and I'll never see the second half of it. He had a great eye, but I'm not sure he was a great director.
I know what you mean. I sort of get that. I haven't seen New York Ripper. That's one.
Don't.
It's not worth it.
It's awful. It's profoundly misogynistic, and it's just relentlessly unpleasant in a way that I just found tiresome after a while.
Well, what is it that you think a film has to have? Because, I mean, there's some very strong images in Argento as well. What is it that it has to have to not make it just, this is just horrid? I don't...
I'm with Mark Gatiss on this, where he actually said for him there has to be a beauty to a horror film. And I very much agree with that. If we're thinking back to James Whale or Val Luton or Murnau, right back to the 20s. Now we think to, Terence Fisher's Hammer films, Bava and Argento. There is a beauty to all of them. It's a very macabre beauty at times, but it is there. And I think possibly in the best of Fulci's films, it's there as well. But I think in a lot of them, they're just a bit ugly, I find at times.
I remember seeing one of his films that I turned off halfway through, and I can't remember the title, but it's about a guy who's in a lot of gambling debt, and he's played by an American actor, I think, and he kills this old woman, but it takes him ages to kill her, and he's got to put her head in the oven and cook her head and stuff like that, and it's just really, it's just like, and it's meant to be a comedy. That's the
right.
That's the thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a scene in the house by the cemetery where this guy's attacked by a vampire bat, which latches onto his hand, and he's stabbing at it again and again and again with a pair of scissors. And I'm just thinking, well, bats never the easiest creatures to show successfully on screen anyway, but he's flailing around with this bat and stabbing at it and stabbing at it. And how long is this bat going to take to die, and what is going to be left of the guy's hand by the time he finishes with it?
But as you say, logic and sense. I mean, it's a little bit like the spaghetti westerns as well. It's that sort of heightened, dramatic. It doesn't belong to the world of realism, put it that way.
No, it's like, I mean, there's a reason why, Argento made 2 films set in the world of the opera. It's this very operatic sort of level of violence, yeah.
I mean, just going back to something you said about the Mark Gatiss quote about something of beauty, I was thinking, in terms of like the recent craze for folk horror, dating back to The Wicker Man, which seems to have become like a seminal film. I rewatched The Wicker Man recently, and it's... that's a beautiful film. I mean, that looks gorgeous.
It's tremendously well done. It looks amazing, because of exactly that sort of natural setting, the remote island. It's probably a career best performance by Christopher Lee, and it's just the remorseless logic of it, where you watch it the first time and you think, oh, wow, how's he going to get out of this one? And still up until the very end, you're thinking, there'll be a police helicopter on the horizon now and he's going to be okay. And then it ends and you think, wow, he didn't make it. Spoilers, unfortunately. But for a 50-year-old film. And then you watch it again and you start thinking, oh, yes, it's like a well put together watch in some ways, where you see the machinery of the plot ticking over and think, oh, this is just very, very clever. I
think that film is kind of spoiler proof. I agree. When I first watched it, I was absolutely gobsmacked by the ending, and like, I can't believe he's not rescuing a girl from there rather than himself. Yeah. He's the girl. He's the virgin,
Yeah.
But having watched it and then rewatched it, as soon as you know the ending, it makes it's even more enjoyable just sort of seeing his doom unroll.
Yeah. From the same period, have you seen Blood on Satan's Claw?
Yes, very recently. Again, that was quite like 6 months ago, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, all of those films of sort of soily, twiggy, nettly English horror, that sort of folk horror, rural horror. I think they really work very well.
They do. I mean, I remember Piers Haggard saying that so often in Blood on Satan's Claw, he's shooting it near ground level as if to suggest that, the earth itself, there's something wrong with it. There's something unholy there. And there's a really real creeping atmosphere of dread and evil about that particular film, which I think works ever so well. I mean, you see the creature a little bit too much at the end, perhaps, but it's incredibly effective, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, revealing stuff is always problematic when you get to...
difficult, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, even sort of Ridley Scott in Alien, I think, had absolutely the right idea. And even there were a couple of bits where he could have shown less of the alien.
I think so, yes. No. Yeah, absolutely.
I think specifically there's a shot, I think it's when, is it Tom Selleck gets...
That's it, yeah. There's just a little bit too much of
it. Looks like a guy.
Yeah.
It looks like a guy.
And it is a guy in a suit, I think, at that point, isn't it? So, yeah. Night of the Demon is the one that people always disagree on. Do we need to see the demon or do we not need to see the demon? And I actually find it quite effective. I think, well, that's what demons look like. That's what they look like, in old woodcuts and manuscripts and things like that. So I don't actually mind seeing it. If there is a problem with it, it's that we see it in the opening scene. And so you're always aware, well, the demon's there, that it's out there. It's not just in the guy's head. Whereas if you'd just seen it at the end, I think you'd have thought, oh, wow, yeah, that looks pretty good.
Yeah, that's, again, another sort of strange... I mean, that must have been like early 60s?
Earlier than that, I think. Late 50s, I think.
50s?
Late 50s, yeah.
That's a strong film for its time as well.
Oh, it is, yeah. I mean, it's wonderful. And it's, Jacques Tourneur, it's wonderfully well made.
When you were talking earlier as well about the classic sort of Universals, when you'd have those double bills and you'd have a Universal horror, I got the box set of the Monsters collection, the Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and everything. I love those films, but I'm never scared. There's that sort of thing. No. It's like a Christmas card version of horror where everything is there for the atmosphere, but I'm sort of watching them going...
Yeah, and likewise, to be honest, I think some of them are wonderful, but they don't scare me anymore. I do remember seeing the first one I ever saw was the Karloff version of The Mummy, directed by Karl Freund, and I would probably have been about 10, but there was one image in that which did scare me, and it wasn't the mummy awakening, it's just Karloff after he's basically, unwrapped himself, if you like, and there's this very effective makeup job on him. And Freund suddenly just cuts straight into his eyes, which seem to be glowing, and it's just his face filling the screen with these glowing eyes. And at the age of 10, that did actually shake me a bit, yeah. But sadly now, I mean, I almost wish they could have the same effect as they might have had on me when I was a small boy, and sadly they don't. But
I mean, I wonder at the time if they were, because of course they're being made under different, I don't know if the production code probably hadn't come in quite yet, but certainly a certain sense of restraint, let's say. So I'm not even sure if they're necessarily sort of intending to be much more than chilling.
Yeah, I mean, it was famously the Black Cat caused a bit of a stir. I mean, and that was pre-code, and the ending where Karloff is flayed alive by Lugosi, you don't see any of that. But you kind of see Karloff writhing in silhouette on this cross-shaped sort of scaffold. And that, I imagine, would have been strong stuff for its time, yeah.
Yeah, that's that. No, I found that probably the scariest of those early films. And
almost certainly, yeah.
Well, what film? Because I think I talked to a lot of sort of horror fans, horror aficionados, and I'm always interested about that very subjective thing of being scared, because I think there can be sometimes, especially if you watch a lot of horror films, you sort of become like the sommelier who who can't enjoy cheap plonk anymore.
Yeah.
What sort of thing really scares you, or even now, even today?
God, that's a good question. I think it is perhaps just the sense of isolation and of being alone, and then of realizing that you're not alone. And then there's something else there and you can't see it. It's always just kind of out of your peripheral vision. And I think somebody like Val Lewton was very good at that when he worked with people like Tourneur and Cat People, for example. I think, again, in Argento's best films, that sort of nightmare logic of being trapped in a dream but not being able to wake up, that's a very powerful feeling, I think. And I think a lot of that 70s satanic horror, a lot of that made a big impression on me at the time. The First Omen, for example, The Exorcist, I still think there's an enormous power to that film in many ways. But really, I think it's, and I'll go back to Night of the Demon here, where Peggy Cummins reads a bit from The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, like one that on a lonesome road doth walk in fear and dread. And I think the best bit is what follows, and having once turned round looks back and turns no more his head. And just that feeling, especially in a city like Venice, walking down a narrow street late at night, maybe the fog's rising, and wondering what you would see if you turned around. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Don't Look Now then, because that's the the sort of. I mean, I think it was voted a few years ago. It was voted sort of the best British film par excellence.
Absolutely.
Not a horror film, but just in. What's your relationship to that movie?
I first saw it probably in the late 80s. I think it was on television.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Television, probably watching it with my parents. Then it got to that scene between Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, and I thought, no, please make it stop. Please make it stop. My mum probably said, well, go and make a cup of tea if anyone else wants.
It's funny how that scene goes on much longer when you're watching it with your mum compared to if you're watching it on your own.
It never ends. And so I didn't really get it. I think I was too young to actually understand that, I was just waiting for sort of, people walking along spooky streets and spooky red figures jumping out at them. I think I was too young to really appreciate it. What is the horror in it? I mean, it's the horror is the expression on Donald Sutherland's face as he pulls his little girl out of the pond. I mean, it's awful to watch, you know. I mean, it's so brilliantly performed, and the look of absolute anguish and horror on his face is extraordinary. And then you start to notice other little things like the motif of red that goes through the film, the figure in church on that still that Sutherland is looking at in the very opening scene, the way Rogue kind of uses that, because the colours are all kind of muted apart from the reds throughout. And I think the more I've seen it, the more I've really started to appreciate it. There was a restored version shown in Venice a couple of years ago, it must have been during 2020 it would have been, because we'd emerged from lockdown, but they were showing it outdoors and everybody had to distance. And of course, it was the one night in about 3 months where it hammered it down with rain. But seeing it on a decent version on a big screen, and I thought, yeah, this is wonderfully well done. There's a real emotional heart to it. It's tragic. It really is. I mean, it's and again, the logic the way it unveils itself, where you think, no, it's about Sutherland. It's not about Christie. Yeah, it's about his journey. Yeah. It's tremendous. Again, it doesn't really scare me. Maybe I've seen it too often now.
Yeah, no, it's difficult to say if I'm scared of it now, but it certainly creeps me out, and that ending is incredibly freaky.
Yeah, you still have to brace yourself for that, I think. Yeah,
but the fact that you can brace yourself is a little bit of a relief, I guess. I'm. It's definitely up there for me. I think my first time I ever saw it was when Alex Cox showed it on Moviedrome.
Oh right, yeah.
As with many great films.
He showed The Wicker Man. I think it was the very first one, in fact, wasn't it? Yeah.
Could well have been. I mean, I actually went on the internet a few months ago and sort of got the list of Moviedrome films so I could get any that I'd missed. And I was looking through them going, no, I watched all of these.
Yeah. Oh, it's tremendous, wasn't it?
Electric Glide in Blue.
Yeah.
Tons of them. That really early Willem Dafoe film where he's in a motorcycle gang.
Oh, what's the title of that?
Irredeemable or something. Yeah, it's some adjective about how bad they are. Yeah, no, I mean, the other thing I think about Don't Look Now is I think you could give it to any sort of film class to teach movies, because I just think it's technically so... He's such a great storyteller from a cinematic point of view. He's telling the story via editing and via color.
Absolutely. It's kind of like a masterclass in that, isn't it?
To go back as well to your own writing and your own sort of setting stuff in Venice, he definitely shows a Venice which is not the postcard. It's not St. Mark's Square. You know, I think the first thing you hear Donald Sutherland say when the film transitions out of the prologue from England is "È tutto marcio." It's all rotten.
It is, and actually, Venice in the films of that period, it doesn't look lovely. It always looks broken down and dirty and crumbling away. The ones I mentioned earlier, again, and Chi l'ha vista morire, there's a set in the Molino Stucchi, which is now a posh hotel. And at the time, it was just a wreck. You know, it was overgrown. It was an overgrown mill. But the city looks grimy. Yeah, it's not a lovely place at all.
Even at the end when, again, spoilers for Don't Look Now, when they're going into the church at the end of the funeral, there's just a huge pile of rubbish bags, just an absolutely enormous pile of rubbish. And you can imagine that's intentional. You can't, it would have cost him nothing to say, okay, I want that out of the shop, come and take it away.
I mean, in some ways you think, well, why did they go there? I mean, I know he had the job at the church, but, your daughter has just died and you go somewhere with a sense of decay and death is almost tangible. It's
and your daughter died drowning, and you go to
it's a city based on water. Yeah,
I mean, isn't that a little bit of a horror trope though? Like the Roy Scheider character in Jaws going to an island and not liking water. It's just like you.
I suppose that's it, isn't it? Yes, yeah.
You got to trap your character with his internal demons.
Jack Nicholson, who is quite obviously mad from the off, goes and takes a job in a hotel miles and miles and miles from civilization. Yes,
and he's so obviously a terrible writer as well.
Oh, yeah.
No playing or work makes Jack a dull boy. I mean, he's going to read that. That's just...
It's an experimental work, I suppose, yes.
it's his Finnegan's Wake.
Yes, exactly.
But I love the fact that there's absolutely no evidence that he's ever written anything before.
No, nothing. No.
I'm working on my third novel. It's not. Yeah. It's like, do you find The Shining scary?
I love it. I think it's immensely powerful and it's wonderful to look at. And I could just watch it over and over again. I don't know if I find it scary. Maybe I did the first time, actually wondering what was going on. The old woman in the bathtub, the blood or whatever it is pouring out of the lift shafts, the spooky kids. Yeah, the first time I probably did. I saw that re-released about 2 years ago again, and I just thought, I love this. I think this is great, but it's not really scaring me anymore. Oh, this is all rather sad, isn't it?
I've not got to that point. I mean, with The Shining, I never found it particularly scary, and then I watched it on the big screen. I'm very fortunate to see it at Cannes when they did the sort of special screening, and they had Stanley Kubrick's daughter came, and it was amazing. Cuarón, Alfonso Cuarón. The Mexican director of Gravity and Children of Men, and I found that sitting and watching it in a big screen with a room full of people was actually the most frightening I'd ever experienced it. It just just because of the soundtrack and the size of the images and the way you were in that maze and you're in that hotel, and rather than being claustrophobic, which Kubrick does one of those counterintuitive things of he makes the hotel massive. So you're not claustrophobic, you're agoraphobic. It's actually too big for you. Everybody's dwarfed in it.
Absolutely. The
little boy on his trike is just as tiny as the adult. One other Italian director I'd like to ask you about is Ruggero Deodati. What's your take on his work?
Whoa, I honestly haven't seen very much. I haven't seen, is it Cannibal Holocaust is the biggie, isn't it? Yeah, I genuinely haven't seen that. It's one of those films where I think, would I actually watch this? I mean, it's the fact that, the real life cruelty to animals and stuff is, I'd have issues with that, I suspect. So I actually haven't seen anything by him. Yeah. I
think I remember the one of the DVD releases that they did, they actually did have options. Do you want the
animal cruelty version? Yeah. Oh yes, also that's a weird thing, isn't it? Yes, yeah. Yeah. What sort of monster would you have to be to say, yeah, I'm going to watch that? Yes. So I haven't actually seen it. Have you?
Oh yeah, I've seen Cannibal Holocaust, and it's not a film I would recommend, but it is extremely effective. I mean, not a film I would recommend just simply because I wouldn't want to be responsible for someone sort of being upset, because it is gruesome, and it just has a gruesomeness all the way through it. It's sort of drenched in ickiness and snuff film vibes. And in fact, Deodati had a huge court case in Milan where he was accused of having murdered people, partly because of the publicity, because to do the advertising, they didn't get any of the actors to do interviews because they wanted it to be like they disappeared, Blair Witch style, because it's a found footage film.
Yeah.
And some people said, okay, this is a snuff film, and the prosecutor in Milan, and he had to show how he'd made certain shots.
I think there was a similar case with Fulci. Was it after Lizard in a Woman's Skin, which actually is a really good film, and there were some dismembered dogs in it or such like. And again, they had to get the special effects guy to demonstrate that these were not actual dogs who were harmed during filming. But
yeah, I mean, sometimes I wonder if there's also a little bit of the publicity guy behind the scenes.
Almost certainly, yeah.
This will really boost the film if we have a couple of thousand euros in lawyers, and then we got millions worth of publicity. There's probably some people listening to this who haven't seen any Italian horror at all. What would you recommend they sort of start with?
I would say it depends very much on your tastes. If you do have a taste for the Gothic, then either Barber's Black Sunday or Black Sabbath, they're both wonderful. If for the more crime-related elements, Argento's first, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage, it works as a brilliant crime thriller, like a Hitchcockian thriller, as well as it works as a horror film. Tenebrae is fascinating. It's ever so well made. His use of colour in that, or use of the lack of colour in that. And my goodness me, Tenebrae never gets boring. There's a murder about every 10 minutes, and it's just the inventiveness, it's like you're thinking, how many ways can I think of to kill somebody spectacularly and operatically? The razor blade murder where you see the blade going through the light bulb. I just watched and rewatched that and thought, this is just so well done. This is ever so clever. So I'd say if you like the Gothic, go back to Barber's Black Sunday or Black Sabbath or, oh my goodness me, Kill Baby Kill, which is a terrible title for a wonderful film. It's called Operazione Paura in Italian. It sounds like a spy film. It's not. It's a high Gothic piece. Fellini might have been influenced by it when he shot his segment of Spirits of the Dead. But that's a beautiful, beautiful looking film. And if gore is your thing, well, Fulci is never, ever going to let you down on that score. His zombie film is iconic. I've still never worked out, how did he do the shark scene in Zombie, where you have a zombie fighting a shark, and that's a real shark, surely. How did he do that?
It's got to have sort of chainmail underneath or something and be a shark guy.
But the shark guy, this guy's an extra. He's probably only getting a couple of bob a day. And it's like, what's my role in this? What's my motivation? Well, you're fighting a tiger shark. Okay, so where's the stunt shark? Well, we don't actually have one of those. This one will be fine.
We're just going to sick a shark on you.
Crazy guy.
My interesting shark fact is the guy who invented the snow in It's a Wonderful Life was eaten by a shark filming a movie called Shark Attack.
Really?
Yeah.
Right.
Same
Wow.
special effects guy. Yeah.
Wow.
If I was telling you this a year ago, I would remember his name as well, but I can't remember it now.
It's probably quite easy to Google. There can't be many people who have invented that. Yeah.
Have you never been tempted to, or have you sort of bled this into your own fiction writing, or have you ever thought, I'd really love to do a pure sort of horror Gothic?
In all honesty, I don't know if the sort of horror that I like reading, I don't know if there's much of a market for that these days. The sort of the M.R. Jamesy and Arthur Machen style of horror. I don't know how much of a market there is for that these days. And I honestly don't know if I've got it in me to write like that. My fourth crime novel, Venetian Gothic, I suppose, is the closest I've come to that. And I'm, playing around with finding empty graves on the cemetery island and setting scenes on the ossuary island of Sant'Ariana and things like that. And that's probably the closest I've got to it. I do put a couple of in-jokes into every book in terms of character names and things like that. And if people spot them, that's nice. I mean, there's an investigative reporter in one of my books called Gianni Brezzi, who is named after Gianna Brezzi, which was Daria Nicolodi's character in Profondo Rosso. And she just died, so I thought, so I changed the name as a sort of little tribute and things like that. But in terms of doing a pure horror novel, I don't know. I don't know if I've got it in me, to be honest. I'd probably write something and people would say, well, this kind of thing with H.P. Lovecraft or something like that. I do have a fan who keeps encouraging me to write a Lovecraftian horror set in Venice, which is one of these days. Yeah.
It's so funny. Lovecraft's far more effective at adjectives than he is a writer. I mean, I think his the atmosphere of Lovecraft is really good. The actual stories and books of Lovecraft, not so much.
Yeah, he never met an adjective he didn't like, did he? Yeah, when he's at his best, it's tremendously good. I think At the Mountains of Madness is terrific. Charles Dexter Ward is terrific. But there are quite a lot of his short stories. Well, he'll use the word gibbous perhaps a little too often, or he'll overload it with adjectives. I do enjoy him.
I love the way his twists at the end are always so obvious, and yet he sort of delivers them as if it's like
you're never going to guess what's happening here.
The monster, right? The monster. It's you. That's the I got that from paragraph 1.
Yeah.
I got it from the title.
Yes. I looked in the mirror, and yes, the reflection was yes.
Absolutely.
Bless him. Yeah.
And And in terms of sort of like the books that you've written already, have you got any interest in turning those into something sort of dramatic, cinematic, or televisual?
Oh, that would be lovely. I mean, they're on audio, which is nice, and that's as far as I expected them to go. We did have some interest from a TV company in Germany, and I think it was probably the wrong time. The books hadn't come out in Germany at that point. I think if we waited a couple more years, maybe they might have gone for it. But you never know. It would be nice, obviously. It would be nice to see. And at the same time, I'd probably think, oh, I didn't really imagine Nathan looking like that. But I'd get over that. Yeah.
Who's in your head as Nathan Sutherland then? Who would you cast?
David Tennant would be terrific, I think. Or if not that, Michael Sheen, because he's terrific and he can do anything. But of course, they're both working on Good Omens together. So it's, yeah. Yeah, either of those I'd be delighted.
When I was a kid, I used to read books. I always used to cast them in my head as I was.
I still do that. I absolutely do that. Yeah, If it was reading a horror novel, then I could be pretty sure that Peter Cushing or Christopher Lee would turn up in my head at some point, and American Noir, Humphrey Bogart's going to be there at some point, and I still do that. Yeah.
So speaking of reading film books, what would your recommended film book be?
My recommended book, right? Jonathan Rigby put out a trilogy over a period of years: American Gothic, English Gothic, and Euro Gothic, and they are all tremendous. But I would really recommend Euro Gothic as an introduction to the Euro horror genre. It's incredibly comprehensive. It's obviously a labor of love. It's immensely readable. And my goodness me, I've learned I came up with this massive list of films that I just wanted to watch after reading it. So I can very highly recommend Jonathan Rigby's Euro Gothic.
Brilliant. That's superb. I've not read that, so I shall add that to my incredibly long list of stuff to read. Listen, Phil, thanks so much for your time.
That's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been really good fun talking to you.
Good, and I hope we can do this in real life once you're out of quarantine. So.
So that was my conversation with Phil. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. There was lots of interesting stuff there. His recommended book was Jonathan Rigby's, well, he kind of recommended the series American Gothic, English Gothic, and Euro Gothic, but it was the last one that he particularly underlined, and that will be the first book on my list. And I'm going to maybe reach out to Jonathan and see if he wants to come on as a guest. Now, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, I'd like to go over to my friends in Norway. The first one is Lucas Knapp, who is a Polish journalist, and let me, without further ado, let me see what his recommended book is.
Okay, so we're on the road in Norway with Lucas Knapp, who is a Polish writer on film. He's writes widely, and he's also got his own YouTube channel, which is called Knapp on...
It's Knapa. Yeah, I mean, it's Knapp is my surname, and Kanapa is couch in Polish, so it's like my Knapp's couch, literally. So yeah.
So it works better in Polish.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely Polish proper YouTube channel names.
How are you enjoying this is your first trip to Norway as well?
I love it so far. I'm used to be South country lover. I just came back from Fuerteventura when I was surfing, and now I'm here, so it's like really mindfuck a little bit. So, but I love it so far. It's white and fresh, and it's really like my eyes are really wide open.
Yeah, it's absolutely from one extreme to another.
Yeah, no, I love it actually. I love the contrast.
And so, have you got a favourite book for us, a book on film?
I do actually. One of my first book that I read during my film studies at the University of Derby was David Bordwell's book on Ozu. It's called Ozu and the Poetics of Cinema. And I remember the book, actually it was, I didn't know any film about Ozu's films when I read the book. So before I watched my first Ozu's film, I read actually book, and wow, the book I think it's like exemplary book on the film author. David Bordwell's style of writing is very clear, very exact, very precise, and I love how he actually presents like the author's work. I mean, you don't get to learn much about Ozu himself, but you get to know everything about his style, and actually he puts his films in the variety of contexts. Context of Japanese culture, context of international distribution, Japanese culture as well, and love it. I mean, it's very refreshing book.
And you quite like you like a lot of Bordwell's other work as well, right?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you have like his classic book about film style. So yeah, David Bordwell's an amazing author. I'd love to actually hear you talking with David Bordwell. I'm sure he would agree.
Yeah. Okay, that'd be great. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion for the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I also had the opportunity to meet up once more with friend of the podcast, Kaleem Aftab, and we talked about recommended books.
Okay, Kaleem. Kaleem Aftab. We're in Norway. We're on the road going south from Tromsø. Can you just tell us? No, we're going south.
Are we going south?
Yeah.
Oh, you had better reason.
That's where the fjord is. Just tell us for a second what you can see out the window.
I can see, I guess it's a fjord with water, but it's so misty it's hard to see. There is some beautiful trees which are straight out of your favorite noir Scandi TV series. They look perfectly leafless and twig friendly. I don't know what they are actually, but they're very tall and skinny, good for this weather. And then a lot of snow, and it's snowing heavily.
Brilliant. And I'm just going to ask you about your favourite film books. Of course, you've been on the podcast before, so we won't ask you for those recommendations, but I think you've got 2 film books you want to tell us about.
I really like this book on filmmaking by Alexander McKendrick, who made one of my favourite films of all time, Sweet Smell of Success. For me, if you're a movie director or you want to know about how to make a film in a very classical fashion, this is the Bible. He really goes through all the shots, tells you some of the terms that directors will use, tells you about composition, wide, mid, close-ups, when he thinks you should use them. Obviously he worked at a time where handheld was not really in fashion, so it's very classical in many ways, but it's the basics, and I think it's a bit like Picasso. He knew how to draw pictures amazingly that were still lifes and replicas of landscapes. But when he really, so you need to know those basics before you can really play about with them.
Okay, brilliant. And I'm actually thinking of doing an episode with Paul Cronin just entirely on that book, because I think he's working on it. He's working on several books about Alexander McKendrick at the moment. And your second book?
I mean, I have a few books actually, which is not just to say. It's interesting you mention Paul Cronin, because his Herzog on Herzog is probably the best interview book I've ever read. The anecdotes from Herzog are great. The research that Cronin has clearly done and the effort he's put in to ask the right questions is exemplary. And he's an all-round nice guy, so that all works, so that's great. I've mentioned on the podcast a semi-biography, autobiography, something like a biography, by Akira Kurosawa, which is something like a biography, which is interesting because it doesn't really deal with his career, but it's about the things in his personal life that really pushed him in the direction to make the kind of films that he did. The injustices he felt, his love of martial arts is really clear. He talks about wanting to go and work with his teacher. He also had a father who was very disciplinarian. but it's written in that, Japanese style of like Murakami, which is full of melancholy, and the tone really fits Kurosawa. It's a mix of like where the melancholy meets drama in a big way, and I really like it. I think that's a great book. I also, when I was younger, I read A Cinema of Loneliness, and that was an influence on me now, whereas I think now, if I read it again, I might read it again. I think I won't like it so much.
Yeah, I've got it on the shelf. This is the book about Arthur Penn and Coppola and those sort of new Hollywood stars.
It's like a new Hollywood book, and it's about alienation, but it's alienation, maybe today I will look at it differently, because I seem to recall it's alienation from a very white perspective, and the 70s new Hollywood was from that, and it did create a lot of great underworld characters, but it doesn't really deal with class in the way I would maybe like it to. It deals with great shot making and how you can relay alienation in a really good way, but I think the analysis of characters is quite myopic in many ways.
Yeah, it's definitely of its time. When I reread it recently, you do notice those sort of failings if you want to look at it in that way. Okay.
One more.
Oh, one more. Okay.
It's also another Japanese biography, which is I can never remember in my head if it's Takeshi versus Kitano or Kitani versus Takeshi, which way it is. But it's a splendid book, written in a great style. I read, this is someone who would be interesting for your podcast, because I read that the author of that book, whenever he watched a film, even if he wanted to watch a scene halfway through, he would always rewatch the film from the beginning.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a time-consuming but a kind of purist approach.
It's very purist. He believes like every time he watched a film, he'd pick up something else, and when he reached the scene, he would be able to talk about it in a more nuanced way. And I find that fascinating. But wow, yeah, time-consuming as hell. A good philosophy in the age of video cassettes. Not so much these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thanks very much, Colin. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And finally, Anders Emblem, the Norwegian film director of a wonderful film called A Human Position. And so he had this to say in regard to his favourite film book.
I've been I dried up the last years.
Right.
But now I got a few new books. I got the Florida Project book and the Dragon Inn book.
Right.
Those two I should try and get to.
Are those sorts of like little monographs, sort of?
The Sean Baker one is now the Florida Project one is, the writer is J.J. Murphy, I think.
Right.
And he wrote a book a long time ago that's called Me and You and Memento and Everyone, or something like that.
Oh, right.
It's about screenwriting in independent films. And that book has been very helpful for me when I started thinking about making films.
Well, yeah, that's actually my question, is sort of like if you were to recommend a film book.
That's it.
That would be the one. Okay, could you give us a bit of a...
It's been a while since I read it, but it's sort of... it takes, is it 10 independent films?
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of breaks them down into the screenwriting part of it. It's a bit weird because none of them are specifically screenplays per se. They're always very you have to see them with the directing, but I think it just shows that you can do whatever you want. You just have to do what feels right, and maybe it helps people to say you can do it this way, you can do it this way and this way, and the introduction and the sort of the epilogue chapters is the ones I read most, because he's just, I don't know, he's so good at writing about it, and it's really inspired. It directly inspires images when I read these books and other film theory books and stuff like that.
Excellent, brilliant. Okay, great.
Okay, so that's all for this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. A little bit different this week, so I hope you enjoyed mixing it up a little bit. Thank you very much to Elliot Atkins for the music, Ali Howard for the art, and thank you all for listening. I really do appreciate it. Please come back again for the next episode next week.
1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
Hey, it's Mark Marin from WTF here to let you know that this podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. And I'm sure the reason you're listening to this podcast right now is because you chose it. Well, choose Progressive's Name Your Price tool, and you could find insurance options that fit your budget, so you can pick the best one for your situation. Who doesn't like choice? Try it at Progressive.com. And now, some legal info. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.